Hello and welcome. Today I'll be talking with a man who cheated death twice with faith, a good fight, and forgiveness. Stay with us. Hi, I'm Jack Knight. Thanks for joining us today here on Wordnet. My guest today is Deacon. How many deacons have you met in your life? Mike Bellender. Mike is working in the San Bernardino diocese, and he has a story to tell that would just raise the hair on anybody's head. Mike, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Jack, likewise. Nice to meet you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Now, a deacon, what does a deacon do?
Maybe the question is, what does a deacon not do? A deacon is an ordained minister of the Catholic Church. We assist the priest on the altar. We preach. We preside at weddings. We preside at funerals. And we are given the faculty to baptize. And the difference between a priest and a deacon is that a deacon is allowed to be married, which I am. I have one wife, 3 children, and 5 grandchildren, with one on the way.
Mazel tov.
Yes. And whereas a priest is not allowed to be married, but a priest, on the other hand, is able to absolve sins and also to consecrate host into the body and blood of Christ at Mass. So there's a trade-off.
So it has to do with those 2 sacraments.
It has to do with those 2 sacraments. Yeah.
And what called you to the diaconate?
I, as early as 2nd grade, had a calling actually to the priesthood, and I went into the seminary in my freshman year in high school, stayed in the seminary for 4 years, but in my senior year I discovered girls, and I thought, God does not want me to be a priest. So the calling, I think, stayed with me throughout my young adult years and even into my older adult years. But at church, I had more and more people coming to me and say, Mike, have you thought about the diaconate? And I think God works through other people. Sometimes you need to start listening when people and multiple people tell you that you should be doing something, because I think God works through those people.
Well, God tried to work through Mrs. Gilhooly, in my case. Her daughter was a very good friend of my mom, and I would see her going to the market with her cloth coat and her little straw hat and her high shoes and her little shopping bag, and she would always say, "Oh, good morning, John," my real name. "You would make a wonderful priest." And I said, "Well, thank you, Mrs. Gilhooly, but never give it serious thought." But she was working in God's favor there, you know.
She was planting a seed.
Yep.
She was planting the seed.
Was indeed.
Yeah.
When you started your religious vocation, was it easy for you? It was just, I want to do this, or did you have to have more convincing?
No, it was really something that I really wanted to do. Most of the convincing probably had to be on my wife's part. I had to assure her that I would still be a family man, even at times when the church is calling. You can get pulled in 2 different directions, but they do teach us in diaconate training that family should come first, but what happens in reality and what they tell you sometimes are 2 different things, because sometimes you have to make a decision. Am I going to be with my family today? Am I going to be with the church that's calling me to do? And so there's a lot of discernment in different areas where things conflict like that.
Yeah.
So
now there are a couple of things that may have interrupted your life.
Yes.
And your experience.
Yes.
Now, what kind of work were you doing when you had your first encounter with death?
I was actually self-employed in printing and office supplies, but the business took a nosedive economically. So I took a part-time job with a cable company, selling cable at night from 5 until 9. And I got in the habit of staying out at the building in Ontario and walking each woman out to their car as their shift was over. So I would stay out there until like 9 or until 11 o'clock in the evening.
At that fateful night, what happened?
On that fateful night, everything went as normal. I walked the second to last lady out to her car, watched her take off and go, and I went back and did the ET thing. I phoned home to let my wife know that I was coming, and then I went back downstairs to walk the last lady out to her car. And as I opened the door to go outside, the door whooshed out of my hands, and before we knew it, 5 ski mask men were on top of us. My very first thought was that this is a joke. Things like this just don't happen to me. That was a very fleeting thought, only lasted about 5 seconds, because one of the intruders grabbed my throat, and I'm looking down the barrel of his gun.
And this other person was a female?
Was a female.
Must have been awful for her.
Yes, it had to be awful for her. The fear, you can almost see your heart jumping out of your chest. And I can remember praying at that point, Lord, tell me what to say. And they started, and I said, please don't shoot. I've got a wife and 3 kids. And they start yelling profanities at me to shut up, and they pushed us back into the building. The alarm had not yet been set, and so they pushed us down, made us kneel on the ground with our noses touching the ground and our hands behind our back. And then they started questioning us why there were 3 cars out in the parking lot and only 2 of us coming out of the building. And I described the car that I was driving, which was a Volvo, and they kicked me in the face and pistol whipped me. We know you drive that car, you mother, blah, blah, blah. I won't say the rest of it here on film. And then I made a mistake of saying what kind of car the lady I was with had, and they kicked me in the face and pistol whipped me again. And then I heard words that I thought I would never hear. If there's anybody else in this building, you're a dead man. I'm going to kill you, just as cold as ice. And once again, I could see my heart just racing out of my chest. And at that point, he sent 2 of his men throughout the 2-story building to search, find out who else might be in there. And as they were gone, they duct taped our eyes and duct taped our hands behind our back. And I truly thought it was my last night on earth. And like I said, they said if they find anybody else, that I'm a dead man, just cold. But I remembered something that nuns in the 3rd grade said. They said, if you're near death, pray the act of contrition. And I began to pray the act of contrition silently at first, and the most incredible thing started to happen. I was filled with the most intense peace I've ever felt in my entire life. And I began to pray the act of contrition out loud, to the point where I didn't care whether they heard me or not. And this feeling, I felt like I was lifted by 1,000 angels. And like they were singing the 23rd Psalm to me, even though I walk in the valley of death, I fear no evil, for you are at my side. Well, eventually the 2 men came back empty-handed, and we found out the next day the 3rd car belonged to another employee who had run out of gas and left it parked there overnight. So they get us up off the ground, and blindfolded, we lead them down the hall to the warehouse. They were there to steal cable boxes. Halfway down the hall, they asked us if there was any other alarms in the building. And neither one of us knew about a separate alarm that was in the warehouse, so we said no. And they leave us in a room that's probably 20 feet by 20 feet, and I'm standing there in this incredible sense of peace with my eyes duct taped and my hands duct taped behind my back, and I begin to hear this humming sound. And because my ears were partially duct taped, it sounded more like the hum of their truck, so I didn't give it too much thought. Well, it turned out to be a loud alarm. And the next thing I know, I hear this commotion, and I hear the patter of feet. And then I hear this blast that just vibrates the room. I feel a warm sensation go through my back. My left leg goes entirely numb. And as I'm falling to the ground, 3 words shoot out of my mouth faster than the bullet that went into my spine. And those 3 words were, I forgive you. And when I hit the ground, I was stunned. I mean, I heard the words. I know the gunman heard the words. And I thought, where did that come from? But it was instantaneous. There was no way I could, on my own, think that fast to even begin to say those words. It was the most incredible feeling.
A couple of times in my life, once was at a memorial service for a woman that I knew from graduate school. I didn't know her well. I met her a number of times, and she was impressively just wonderful. And so I spoke to what I knew, and all of a sudden, words came out of my mouth that I didn't say.
Yeah, that you didn't have control over.
I had none
Right.
whatever.
Right.
I think that God does that more often than we think.
Yeah. Well, in looking back, I truly believe that at that moment, God was beginning my own spiritual and physical healing. I should not even be walking today. The bullet was so close to the center of my spine. I should not be walking today, but I am. And it put me into such a deeply spiritual connection with our Creator, that whole experience.
Now, you had surgery.
I had surgery. Eventually, the emergency room doctors didn't want to take the bullet out because it was so close to the center of the spine. They thought that they would have more damage by taking it out. But the head neurosurgeon at Loma Linda University came in the next morning and, with my permission, went in and took it out. In fact, it was kind of funny because he asked if I was allergic to anything, and my humor was still intact. And I said, yes, I'm allergic to bullets. And he laughed. So the bullet is gone.
How long were you hospitalized?
I was supposed to be in there for like 3.5 or 4 weeks. I was out in a week. And that, to me, is part of God's healing, due to his healing.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I was off work almost the whole year because I had to learn how to walk again. And the kicking and the beating in the face, I had double vision for at least a month after the event. And I could only, for about 10 years, I could only smile out of one side of my face because of the nerve damage in the kicking in the face.
And then, not too long afterwards, you're a deacon.
Yeah, that event happened in 1996. I made the decision to enter the diaconate in 2002, and I was ordained in 2006 for the Diocese of San Bernardino.
And how long does it take to become a deacon?
It takes, today it actually takes a little bit longer, but back when I was doing it, it took 4 years, but you had to take some concurrent courses in addition to the diaconate courses. So it was expedited. When I went through, it was expedited. Today, I think it takes about 7 years.
Oh my goodness!
To become a deacon.
That's a long time.
Yeah.
I would think.
And a lot of commitment. A lot of commitment.
I would imagine so.
Yeah, a lot of your weekends are taken up, but you know, I can't think of a better guy to work for. The benefits are out of this world.
All the benefits that you don't get
The benefits
elsewhere.
are out of this world.
Well, we're going to talk about your next adventure with Grim Reaper when we come back.
Okay.
I think that you'll be interested to hear the rest of this story, so stay with us. We'll be back in just a couple of moments.
In life, we are not alone. We live with and among people. We constantly enter into contact and relationship with others. Some of these relationships are very formal and superficial, but some are very deep and intimate. How do relationships work? We can all easily relate with those relationships that have been wounded, which are sometimes even bleeding. Father Martin Padovani, SVD, has written a book called Healing Wounded Relationships. It is the result of his many years of work as a marriage counselor. He deals with some of the very simple but pertinent topics like communications, listening, intimacy, forgiveness, reconciliation, and dealing with anxiety and fear. And of course, a very practical question: how do you make a marriage work? You will surely be enriched by this book. You should get it for yourself, or maybe get a copy for a relative or a friend. Be blessed by this book and improve your relationships.
Call the number on the screen or email us to get your copy. You can also place your order by visiting our website. Do it today.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. We're back with Deacon Mike Bellender, who experienced probably about as scary a frightening thing as could possibly happen, shot and left for dead. But then he goes on to his life's work just about and gets surgery for that bullet in his back and gets E. coli flesh-eating disease, very often fatal. Tell me about that.
Well, I actually went in for hip surgery.
Hip surgery?
Yeah. And
But that was related to your...
It was related to the gunshot because my left leg is my weak leg. I still got paralysis in my left foot. So so I was shifting my weight to the right, and that caused the hip to give me problems. So at that point, the doctor said, we need to replace your hip. They replaced the hip. Came out of the hospital. It wasn't Redlands Community where I work, a different hospital. And they sent me home with a bed sore and aloe. And the bed sore turned into E. coli flesh-eating bacteria. I was released on a Thursday. By Saturday, I spiked 104-degree fever. By Monday, I could not even stand up because my blood pressure had sank to 64/24. And I ended up in the hospital for 22 days, recuperating from that wound. I mean, it was a huge wound on my backside, at least roughly about that big and about that deep. And the sepsis that I had was, treated every day with antibiotics, and then 3 months I had to go for outpatient. And the nurses were kind of cute because I told them one day it was our 36th wedding anniversary, and they said, we'll have to do something special for you. So I said, what's that? And they said, don't worry about it. Well, when I went home and it was time for my wife to clean the wound, she starts laughing. And I said, what's funny? She says, well, the bandage is in the form of a heart, and it says happy 36th wedding anniversary on it. So the nurses were cute and funny in doing that.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
That's a nice touch.
Yeah.
Now, you're getting better from that. You're continuing with your work as a deacon. And then I think you decide that we're going to talk about this. Tell us about that.
Okay. What happened after the hip surgery is that they added Lyrica to my medicine for nerve pain. I was already on Vicodin for the back pain from the shooting, and I was also on Xanax for post-traumatic stress from the shooting. And when they added Lyrica, I was going into work, and at this point I was a business development account executive for Time Warner Cable. And I was going in, I was supposed to negotiate contracts, but my mind was all foggy and I couldn't think, and I was supposed to deal with lawyers and think clearly, and I wasn't able to do that. So my doctor says, we need to get you off all that medication. So I actually went into Loma Linda Behavioral Health Center in Redlands, and they detoxed me off of the Xanax, the Vicodin, and the Lyrica. When I came out of the hospital, I went into the deepest depression, anxiety, and agoraphobia I've ever experienced in my entire life. In fact, it lasted a whole year and a half. And I was at the point where I didn't want to leave the house. I wanted to cover my head. I didn't want to see family. I didn't want to see friends. And of course, I didn't want to see people at church. It was the most debilitating and humbling experience, because here I'm a deacon and I'm supposed to be out there welcoming people to the church. And it was a totally opposite feeling as to what I should have been experiencing.
So you were trading one bad thing for another.
Exactly.
How did you get out of that?
Well, like I said, I had so many people praying for me. My wife, my children, my friends, but it was the constant prayer of a little man who is a parishioner at Holy Name. Man stands about 5'3", and his name is, believe it or not, his name is Johnny Walker. And he was the best antidote for depression and anxiety and agoraphobia, because he was after me to make Cursillo. And I ended up saying, okay, Johnny, I'll go. And I went to Cursillo.
Tell us about it. Tell us.
Cursillo is a movement that started back in the late 40s, I believe, and it started in Spain. And it's basically a 4-day retreat. And it's one of the most intense retreats I have ever been on. And I've been on, I've been on a lot of them, because in the diaconate you have to go on retreats quite a bit. But this was one of the most profound retreats I've ever experienced, because of the very nature of the way it's designed. And I don't want to go too much into it, because I want to have people truly experience excuse me, I want people to truly experience the retreat for what it really is. And I don't want to give anything away because there's so many exciting things that happen as a surprise. And it's some of those surprises that bring you back to God. So that was the first event that got me really back on the road again. And then that was in September, October of 2012. And then in December of 2012, I made a consecration to the Immaculate Heart of Mary and have been a member of that organization since 2012 as well. And when I look back, Jack, and think of the deep anxiety, I mean, my wife didn't even recognize me. I lost 100 pounds and it wasn't eating and didn't want to do anything. But I look back today and I actually thank God for having sent me through that depression, anxiety, and agoraphobia. Because today it gives me a better perspective of what other people are suffering. And I'm open and upfront. Hey, I went into a psychiatric hospital, and I'll be the first one to admit it. And by finding that my openness and my transparency about it, I get more people coming to me because they know I can relate to them. Yeah. They know that I know what depression is. They know that I know what anxiety is.
What kind of things you talk about when you speak to groups about your experience and what might help them?
When I go around speaking, I talk about my story, but I bring in other stories of other people. I talked about this one woman that told me she was an atheist all of her life. And then she told me that one day her son was diagnosed with leukemia. And for the very first time in her entire life, she stepped foot inside of a church. And she prayed to God. She says, I will believe that you exist if you heal my son. And well, as time went on, the son got worse and worse. And he's in a coma and he's in the hospital. And all of a sudden he wakes up. She's there with him. And he wakes up and he says, Mom. And he points to the corner of the room and he says, Mom, angels here are take me home. Now, he had never been spoken to about heaven being home or angels. But what he said next sealed the deal. He says, Mom, one of the angels looks just like you. Just like you. And when he said that, she was filled with that intense peace, that same intense joy and peace that I experienced during my ordeal. And I told her, I says, you know, Scripture says that there is no greater love than he who lays down his life for his friends. And I said, your son laid down his life so that you would become a believer. And even though he didn't live, she lives today for Christ. And so I bring in different stories. I've collected different stories over the years. And I talk about the need for forgiveness in today's world. I gave a talk at an old folks' home, and you didn't think that anybody there would gather anything up. And there was a woman that was resistant to coming, to hearing my talk. But that chaplain made her feel guilty. He says, well, he's your deacon from your parish. You should come and support him. So she came. And 2 days later, I get a call from the chaplain. And he says, Mike, you won't believe what happened. I said, what's that? He says, remember Cecilia? I said, yeah. Well, she had not spoken to her daughter in 15 years. And when she heard your story and your presentation, she went and made a phone call to her daughter that she had not spoken to and made amends. And so different stories like that. We all have a story. We all have stories of love and forgiveness and compassion. And I try to gather as many different stories to encourage people to lead lives of compassion. Because when Jesus was on this earth, he taught us very simple things: to love one another, to forgive one another, to be compassionate, to serve one another. And I came across this acronym. If you want real joy in our lives, we put J first for Jesus, others for second, and yourself third. That is the true recipe for joy. J-O-Y, Jesus, formula. Others, and yourself.
I have to ask you about one other incident that didn't affect you physically like the others did. Your daughter was in the midst of a shooting, and you didn't know where she was.
Well, no, I knew where she was. She was at the Inland Regional Center. But what happened that day, I was home in bed, sick with the flu, and I get a text message from her. Dad, I love you. Just out of the blue, which is unlike her because normally she's at work and she's very focused. Right. And I thought, that's strange. Well, about a minute later, I get a call from my sister. She says, Mike, do you know what's going on at the Inland Regional Center? I said, no. She says, turn on the TV. And I went emotionally ballistic.
Oh, I bet you did.
Oh, and I prayed to God at that, take me, don't take her. I've had a chance for life. She has not had a chance for life. And for about an hour and 15 minutes, we did not know of her welfare or her well-being. And finally, our daughter, this particular daughter has MS, so she walks with a different kind of gait. And my wife was able to recognize that she came out of that building. But she normally teaches other social workers in that auditorium. And, you know,
It could have been her that was involved.
It could have been her
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
Boy, what a story.
Well, it's
And here you
all
are,
this is-
hale and hearty.
Oh, it's God's story, though. I give credit to him because he's the one that gives us our stories.
Yeah.
He's the one. And all honor and all glory goes to him.
I'm going to ask you to help me.
Sure.
God bless Mike, his family, those people that he ministers to, and to you people out there in our audience who support this ministry. Our prayers are with you. Thank you very much. We'll be back with another guest next week, and it's amazing and wonderful to be able to talk to people who are doing such good work in the name of Jesus.
Amen.
Amen. Amen.
God bless you too,
amen.
Jack.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
In life, we are not alone. We live with and among people. We constantly enter into contact and relationship with others. Some of these relationships are very formal and superficial, but some are very deep and intimate. How do relationships work? We can all easily relate with those relationships that have been wounded, which are sometimes even bleeding. Father Martin Padovani, SVD, has written a book called Healing Wounded Relationships. It is the result of his many years of work as a marriage counselor. He deals with some of the very simple but pertinent topics like communications, listening, intimacy, forgiveness, reconciliation, and dealing with anxiety and fear. And of course, a very practical question. How do you make a marriage work? You will surely be enriched by this book. You should get it for yourself, or maybe get a copy for a relative or a friend. Be blessed by this book and improve your relationships.
Call the number on the screen or email us to get your copy. You can also place your order by visiting our website. Do it today.